Welcome, everybody. My name is Jillian Morris. I'm the founder of Sharks for Kids, and really excited to host this particular webinar because sawfish absolutely fascinate me. And today we're lucky enough to have Dr. Barbara Wueringer speaking to us today, and she is an alumni from Bimini, which is also awesome. Yeah. I love the small world and the connections that we all have to the beautiful little island of Bimini and the Shark Lab. She's also the founder, director, and lead scientist of Sharks and Rays Australia. So focus on sawfish, which is what she's going to speak about today, but also working with some of their cousins as well. And she's a zoologist specializing on behavior, sensory ecology, and biology of elasmobranchs. So thank you to everyone who is joining us today, and thank you, Barbara, for taking the time to share your expertise of these incredible, fascinating animals with us. So I'm going to let you go ahead and take over.
Thank you, Jillian. Thank you so much for having me today. Yeah, so I will be talking about sawfish today, and I will start with a slide where I hope you guys can see this. So basically, we've got 5 species of sawfish found around the world, and 4 of them are found in Australia. And interestingly, that one species that we don't have over here is the species that you have in the States. So that's the small-toothed sawfish. But when you look at this picture, so sawfish have a shark-like body. So they're this weird mix between a shark and a ray. So they're technically a ray. Easy way to differentiate between a shark and a ray is that a ray always has the gills on the underside, whereas even in a shark that is really flat, like a wobbegong, for example, the gills are still on the side. And sawfish can grow 5 to 7 meters in length. And so when I tell people about that, you know, this is it's a number, you think, okay, that's quite big, but look at this image that I have here. I don't know if my pointer actually works. Look at this image and look at the size of the people's heads in comparison to the animal's head and in comparison to the size of the saw. This gives you an idea of how big these animals used to get. And so they're now the most endangered family of fish globally. So these animals are in trouble, and so we need to look after them. Now, one of the reasons why these animals are endangered is because their habitat is in coastal, shallow, inshore waters. So basically, coastal regions in the tropics and subtropics where you have mangroves and muddy bottom, maybe sandy bottom, but they can go into really shallow waters. And so when you look at this animal here, this is a green sawfish. And it was 4.5 meters long, and we caught it in less than a meter of water depth. And so because these animals inhabit these coastal inshore waters, what it means is it makes them extremely susceptible to human change. So when we modify coastal areas, when we modify their habitat, it means that they will disappear from there very often. Now, so these are the 4 species of sawfish that we have in Australia. And so, as I said, the 5th species, which is the small-toothed sawfish, is found in the States, but we don't have it over here. The first species that we have is the large-toothed sawfish. And locally, we call that animal a freshwater sawfish. So it's always important for scientists to work with the Latin names, because the Latin names are the same all around the world. For this species, it's Pristis pristis. But the common name in the States, for example, it's called the large-toothed sawfish. We call it the freshwater sawfish. And the reason why we call it that is because the pups can go all the way up into freshwater, and they will spend the first 10 years of their life there. And these animals are what we call philopatric. Now, I know that's a big word, but I think most of you guys already know what that means. So the most common example of philopatry is the reproductive behavior of turtles. So turtles, when females are ready to lay eggs, they come back to exactly the same beach that they were born, and then they crawl up there and they lay their eggs there. And sawfish have that, freshwater sawfish have that same behavior. So what these guys do is that the females come back to the same river mouth where they were born, and then they give birth, and then the pups swim upstream and spend the first 10 years of their life in those rivers. One of the reasons why sawfish are so endangered is because these animals take 10 years to become sexually mature. So the first 3 species, which are all Pristis from the genus Pristis, on my picture here, they are the ones that take about 10 years to become sexually mature. And then in Australia, we also have Anoxipristis, so that's the knife-toothed sawfish. And these guys reach sexual maturity after 3 years. And because of that, they're still doing the best out of all sawfish species, numbers-wise. Now, what you can see on this image as well is you can differentiate sawfish, the different species based on the characteristics of the saw. So when you look at the saw, how are the teeth spaced? But then also, is the saw straight or is it tapered? And so, for example, when you look at Anoxipristis, the narrow sawfish, you can see that the teeth are really flat, and that's unique for this species, for example. Now, when you work with endangered species, one of the big questions is always, how much have these animals declined? And there is an idea out there that these animals are naturally rare. And I think this idea comes from the fact that they're quite big. They grow to big sizes, as I said before. And so, you know, they might have big home ranges. And so when you think of terrestrial predators, for example, like leopards and mountain lions, these animals have big territories, and so they are quite rare. So, you know, for example, if you think about the smaller your garden is, the more houses you can have in a street. But I think that the idea of sawfish being naturally rare, and I'll show more about that later, but I think that this idea doesn't actually quite fit, because the home ranges of these animals are really, really small. And so this is a picture from, I think it was from Florida. And so that was one good day of fishing. And, you know, that clearly shows that these animals used to be found in quite large numbers. And there is a quote from Harrison and Dalby that says that sawfish were once sufficiently common that the rostrums, so the saws, were used as fence posts in coastal Pakistani towns. The quote has been disputed, so it seems to be that they weren't used as fence posts, but they were used as these kind of fences behind shrines. So maybe not as, you know, as common as this quote seems to tell us, but it's still, I think it still paints a picture. Now, what can cause declines of sawfish? Now, you've got these animals that have, and I will show you a saw here. I will have to take my microphone off. This is a saw of a green sawfish. I'm 1.60 meters tall, 1.65 meters. And so this saw is probably about 145. And so you can see, you know, this is quite a dangerous weapon. It's got a lot of teeth on its side. And also when you look at the tip, these teeth are really long, they're really spiky. And so I'm trying not to allow it to fall over. And so these saws are very, very unique. But they're also the reason why these animals are declining. And so when you have a saw on your face, the question is what could be your natural predators? And in sawfish, I guess there's not too many once they reach a certain size. But so I often say that who can feed on you also depends on your size. So for juvenile sawfish, they will have much more predators than adults. And here are 2 examples. One is a sawfish where the animal got a bite by a juvenile bull shark when he was stuck in a gill net. And the second example is of a sawfish that was taken by a freshwater crocodile in Western Australia. You can assume, or I would assume, that a large sawfish would even eat baby crocodiles if that was something that was on the menu for them. But so for juvenile sawfish swimming in rivers, bull sharks and crocs are probably some of the biggest predators, enemies. Now, the sawfish's saw is something that I find really fascinating, and I've studied its use for 4 years. And Ripley's, believe it or not, ended up summarizing my PhD thesis, so 4 years of my life, in this beautiful picture. A sawfish's toothy snout acts as an antenna and a weapon, for both finding and chopping up smaller fish. And so I will show you more about that because it's a pretty fascinating tool and it's pretty fascinating behavior. Now, when you look at the skin of a sawfish, same as in other sharks and rays, what you will see is little pores distributed on the skin. And these pores can actually belong to two different sensory systems. One of them are the ampulla of Lorenzini. And here on the side, you've got a picture of what such an ampulla looks like. And so each ampulla has a bulb at the end and a canal and then connects to one of these skin pores. And this is the shark's sixth sense, and it allows them to detect weak electric fields in their environment. And the second sense that they have that is unique or to fish, but it's something that we don't have, so it's a bit tricky for us to understand, is the lateral line. And the lateral line, again, so that's canals, but then again, they end in pores in the skin. And the lateral line allows these guys to detect movement in the water around them. And so, for example, when a sawfish sits on the bottom and has its saw held up into the water column, it can detect the electric field, but also the movement of a fish swimming past, which kind of makes it the perfect predator. And so I was looking into these senses and how these animals use that for hunting. And so here are two slides now that give you an idea of what you will see in the following video. So I was presenting sawfish in captivity with electric fields. And on this picture, what you can see is that the electric fields, where it says electrode pair, they were presented on the bottom, so on the substrate of the tank. And then I also presented them in the water column. So you see these long tubes hanging into the water, and at the end of it is where the electric field is found. And so I always had 2 or 4 electric fields when on the bottom, or 4 dipoles where the electric fields would come out from, but there was always only one that was active. And so that allowed me to figure out, are they going for this because they have visual input, so that they see something and go, oh, this is exciting, you know, I might have a go at it, or are they actually going for the electric field? And so in this video starts with the behavior of this animal raking its teeth on the floor. So they do that to sharpen their teeth. And so now you can see there's a dipole at the bottom here. And the animal senses it and then bites it. And in the next video, you can see there is a dipole at the back. So this one, where my cursor is active. And so the animal swipes at it. And so the saw allows them to sense that electric field, but it also allows them to then manipulate the electric field. So if there was a fish, for example, they would impale that fish on that saw. And so I published a paper on that, on the feeding behavior of sawfish, and the editor of that journal loved the idea. So he came up with a very good cover image. And here is a video, and this video is really fast, but here is a video where you can see a sawfish feeding. So you can see how this fish, this is a dead fish, but how this fish is falling through the water column. The sawfish has a go at it, but then also there is another sawfish that comes in, and so they actually fight over the food. So the saw is also used for self-defense, and I think this video shows really well what a powerful weapon the saw is. Sorry. Lost the cursor. There we go. So he's incredibly fast. The other one steals the food from him and then defends it. So I think what these videos show you is how important the saw is to sawfish. And I think this is really, really important for us to understand because, you know, having saws like these trophy saws, I think what we find is that they're probably one of the main reasons why these animals are becoming endangered, because people like to take these saws as trophies and hang them up on their wall. And so one of the most important messages that I like to get across is that the sawfish's saw is much more important for the animal than it is for you to have it on your wall. These saws can now be used. We use them for science, so we take DNA samples from them and things like that. But we have, in our field work, we have come across animals where somebody has taken a trophy and then threw the animal back. And it's a pretty sad thing to see. And there's a team in Western Australia, and they caught a solid sawfish as well, and they were able to put a tag on it. And what they found is that the animal basically, it starves to death, and it takes it about 3 months to do that. So it's a very slow and very painful death, and I think that trophy is absolutely not worth it. So so one of the things that we do as well is we asked members of the general public, and there is a similar program in the States as well. So we asked members of the general public to submit their sawfish sightings to us. And with that, we can determine where the animals are still found. So this is a map that we have created based on the sawfish sightings that were submitted to us. And what you can see is that these animals, they used to be common all the way around Australia, from Western Australia up along the northern parts, Northern Territory, Queensland, and then all the way down to New South Wales, and Sydney is over here. But nowadays, these animals, the recent map of where the animals are found now is much more contracted. So I would say it starts at around here, north of Cairns, and then through WA, but probably ends around here. And so we also look at historic newspaper articles, and these are good examples as well of what I was saying before, that I think back in the day, a lot of people were scared of these animals, and so they thought that these animals would attack humans. And if a sawfish is not handled properly, for example, during research, it can be quite dangerous. It will use the saw to defend itself, but they're not, they're not out there to go out of their way and attack a human. So if you leave them alone, generally they will leave you alone. But so back in the day, a lot of people were killing sawfish and then taking saws as trophies. And so with these historic newspaper articles, and some of them were submitted to us by people who had them at home, we were, for example, able to figure out that historically freshwater sawfish were found all the way down to Brisbane. And so this information is really important, because when you work with endangered species that live in murky waters, they don't come to the surface to breathe, and you want to find out how much have they declined. It's very, very difficult to come to actual numbers and to be able to count them, to figure out, okay, there used to be 100,000 animals and now there's only 3,000. But what is easier to find out is how much their ranges have declined. So yeah, we know that freshwater sawfish are now found north of Cairns. So I think they're historically their range would have been around 2,000 kilometers bigger. So that's a huge area where they have disappeared from. Here are some more historic pictures that were submitted to us. And I think it shows that these animals were used for food. And it also shows that it was quite an event when somebody caught a sawfish. If you look at that lower picture here with the green sawfish, I think these guys are dressed up in their nicest clothing, posing with the animal. And here, these are the weights being written on the animals, and these were actually eaten afterwards. So I'm changing topic now. I'm going into our recent research. So what do we do at Sharks and Rays Australia? So we work mainly, our field work is mainly in Queensland, or is only in Queensland. So when you look here at the map of Australia, this part here is Queensland, and we're based in Cairns, but most of our research is north and west of Cairns. So this is the Cape York region, and this is the Gulf of Carpentaria. This map here is quite colorful, and what I like to show with this map is the diversity of indigenous language groups found in that area. So this area is very, very sparsely populated. There's almost no people there. It's about 2/3 the size of Germany, but there's only 28,000 people who live there. For comparison, Germany, I think, has 72 million inhabitants. And so the population density in the area where we do our research is about 100 times lower than the rest of Australia or Mongolia or Siberia. Okay, so it's extremely remote. And 41%, so almost half of the people who live there are indigenous. And the indigenous groups have their own languages, and so there's if you just look at this map, there is so many different indigenous groups found out there. And for many of them, sawfish are also of cultural importance. I'll tell you a story about that later. But so when we get out to our field sites, it can be quite tricky. So this is an example of us driving to one of the rivers in the Cape, and that was the condition of the road. So it almost looks like a river, but yeah, it can be quite interesting to get out there. Now, once we're out in the field, what we do is we're camping. So that's a lot of fun. We always make sure we have good food, as you can see here on the picture in the lower part. But it can also get a little bit tricky because we always have to make do with what we have. And so, for example, if you look at this is the trailer guard from our boat trailer. And so we had another 500 kilometers to go on a road that was corrugated. So it's a sand road, it rattles a lot. And the trailer guard went flying. And so we just had to get creative, because if we had lost it, we would have had a lot of damage on the boat and the rest of the trailer. So we just had, with mats and ropes, had to just stick it on there and make it happen. And the area is also inhabited by saltwater crocodiles, and they are dangerous to humans. So contrary to what a lot of people think about sharks, with saltwater crocodiles, I would say it's actually true. If you are on the side of the river and you behave in a way that a crocodile can get you, it will probably have a go at you. This is a picture of my footprint. So it's my foot next to a crocodile footprint that we found near a camp. So we had to reassess the situation of where we were camping. My foot is size 7.5 or 37.5 European. So this would have been a 5-meter crocodile. Now, the cultural importance of sawfish is, it varies for the different groups, but I think this one is a beautiful story. So Indigenous Australians or Aboriginals, they very often have the creation stories are centered around the rainbow serpent. And so the rainbow serpent was this big snake that basically brought the world into existence. So it was moving through the land, and as it was moving through the land, it created the land. And so it created this ancestral landscape that people then started to live in. And there is a story from an indigenous group living on Groot Island, which is in the Gulf of Carpentaria, and they believe that the creator was actually a sawfish. And the sawfish led a school of rays and shovel-nose rays from the mainland to the island. And it also, with its saw, it carved out the river that is found on the island. And so that means these animals are quite important, culturally and spiritually for Indigenous people as well. And so when we do our field work, we work with Indigenous ranger groups. So these Indigenous ranger groups look after their land and their sea country. So for them, parts of the ocean are considered to be country as well, because it's so that there's ownership over it, the way it would be over land. And so we teach these people about sawfish as well, because sawfish in some regions of Australia are still found in reasonable numbers, or people don't actually realize that the numbers have dropped until you point it out to them, and then they realize, oh yeah, the last time I saw one was 10 years ago. And so this means that these Indigenous ranger groups, they can look after the animals out on their country, and they can often be out in these areas, they live there. So they're out in these regions where we can't access them during the wet season when the roads are flooded. And so we also do school visits. And with Sharks for Kids, with Gillian, we've developed a food web game that we play with the kids in the schools, and they absolutely love it. So you can download that on our homepage as well, and look at those materials and do the color in sheets and stuff. And so one of the things that we do is we're trying to figure out, what do sawfish do when they, when we're not watching. And remember how I was talking about the home ranges before, and how the smaller your garden is, the more houses you fit in the street. So we're trying to figure out how much space is it that sawfish use when they move around during a year. And I said they're quite large. Some of these animals, this animal that you see in the picture here is called a dwarf sawfish, because the saw is the shortest in relation to the body length. But this animal was actually 3 meters long, so it absolutely wasn't a dwarf. And so we put a satellite tag on this animal, and basically whenever it comes into about 70 centimeters of water, the tag, it looks like a little, you can see it here, it looks like a little spaceship, like a little torpedo. This tag floats to the surface and then basically connects to a satellite and then gives us a location point. And we're also tagged a 3-meter green sawfish, and I'll show you this video from the green sawfish basically of how this animal moves around. And so each one of those little green dots that pop up is when the animal came into water shallow enough. Now this is the raw data, so that means sometimes when the tag came to the surface, it came to the surface briefly, and so the satellite couldn't quite catch the location, and that's why some of the location points are on land. But when you look at this river system, and here at the bottom you've got the scale bar that says 1 kilometer. This river system is what, 8 kilometers long, 9 kilometers long? That's a tiny distance. And for as long as this tag was attached on the animal, which was 10 months, all it did was stay in that river. So it stayed in that small area of let's say 9, 10 kilometers. If you attach a tag, that same type of tag, to a sea turtle, it would probably cross an ocean within that time. So yeah, they have very, very small home ranges compared to other sharks and rays, which makes them quite vulnerable as well to fishing and things like that. I won't show you the whole video, it will go forever. But so one of the questions that people always ask me when I talk about sawfish is, so what can I do? How can I help these animals? If you're in Australia, for example, you can join us in the field. We do expeditions to conduct research on these animals. In the States as well, there's heaps of groups working with sawfish. You know, you can volunteer for public events. You can connect with researchers, and if you have an old saw at home, they would love to take DNA samples from that. But the most important thing that you can do is talk about sawfish. We need to make sure that these animals are not forgotten, and that they will be remembered, and that they stay, you know, that we understand that these animals are slowly declining, and so that everybody who accidentally catches a sawfish knows how to look after them and to release them, and understands that it depends on all of us to do the right thing. And I'm at the end of my talk now, so there's a lot of people to thank. I will just leave the slide on. This is another use of the sawfish saw, the selfie.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for all the information. I've been lucky enough to see a small tooth in the wild once in Bimini. Apparently they were far more common there years ago, but pretty rare. And that was 8 years ago. Yeah. And absolutely incredible female. Never encountered anything like that before. I've seen them in, facilities and things, but just such a rare and just fascinating to see one up close and to watch them move. So different than any of the other animals I've seen in the ocean before. And I'd love to see another one and get out. And
such an unforgettable thing, isn't it? Like, it's such an experience.
Just amazing. And I remember we showed up at the shark lab and we were going to go out and do something in the pens. And one of the guys here was like, get in the boat, get in the boat, get in the boat. And we just got in the boat and drove, didn't know where we were going. And then finally he got on the radio and said, there's a sawfish. And so yeah, it didn't even have fins or anything. It just went and just such an incredible creature. And I felt so lucky to have gotten to have, the hour or so we had in the water with her. And just really, really special, misunderstood. It's exciting because Bahamas, Florida is obviously where there's quite a bit of significant research and being proactive about if fishermen are catching them, how to correctly, like you were mentioning. So really, really fascinating animals. So all right, well, we have a few questions for you. We're going to start off with, what is your favorite species of shark or ray, I guess, in this, or if you have both, you want to do both. I can probably guess ray, but.
Yeah, it would have to be sawfish. I mean, so I think I started working with these animals 14 years ago. And I think every time I see a sawfish, I get as excited as what you just described when you saw this animal in Bimini. Like, it's just such a weird creature. Favorite shark would have to be the spear-tooth shark. So they're freshwater sharks, found in the same areas where we work with sawfish as well. And they're these little fierce predators that live in rivers, and they, they're extremely rare. So they're restricted to a handful of rivers in Australia and PNG. And yeah, just really uniquely adapted to, living in murky waters and that confined habitat as well.
Very cool. Right. And we have Hannah, who has joined us for quite a few of our webinars. Hannah is 9, and she's got a couple of great questions. She wanted to know if they have noses. So she obviously saw the rostrum, the saw, but do they have noses?
Yes. So I will go back on the slide. Is my screen sharing is still on, isn't it? Yeah. So when you look at this picture here, here's my mouse. So this is the sawfish from the dorsal side, so from above. Here is the eye, and that's the spiracle, so that's the little breathing hole. And this side here of this drawing is the ventral side, and here is the mouth, and that here is the nostril. So yes, they do have a nose, and they use the nostrils to smell, and you can see it here.
Cool. And another one, Barb wanted to know, how long do sawfish usually live?
Yes, that's a very good question. And I think, as far as I know, there was one animal that was estimated to have been 42 years old when it died. But there was only one age and growth study done. And I think the animals that were used for that study weren't that big. So I think that would have been maybe a 3.5 meter animal. So then when you think of that back in the day, these animals used to get to 6 meters, 5 meters, close to 6 meters long. They would have gotten a lot older than 42 years, because also the bigger they get, the slower the growth is. So yeah, very comparable to humans.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those, the people who've heard me talk on these webinars is there's so many questions we don't know answers to yet, because we just haven't had the opportunity to explore that, having access to them. Some species we know, so much about because it's easy to have access to them, like the lemon sharks in Bimini, from adults, all the way down to birth. So their entire life history, and having access to an animal at all stages it increases your understanding. It makes it so much easier. But a lot of these animals, it's just really hard to have access to them and to know. And which is also when you start hearing words like critically endangered and endangered, time is of the essence. And so that's just why your work and this work is so important.
I can give you one example. So if I go back to the picture of this freshwater sawfish, this massive animal. So in Australia, we know that these animals, they leave the river systems when they're about 10 years old, which is 3 meters total length. But then afterwards, we don't know where they go. So this is one of the things that we're trying to do is to get a satellite tag on one of the big ones. I don't think animals of that size are still around, but even a 3 meter, 4 meter animal, we don't know, do they aggregate somewhere? Or we know they move out into the marine waters and somewhere in the Gulf of Carpentaria, but we have no idea where they are. Which is quite amazing. Like there's 4 meter animals swimming around and we don't know what they do.
Yeah, it's exciting, but it's also really, again, highlights the importance of this work, of how much we don't know and why it's so important that questions are being answered for better regulations and laws to put in place for protection. So Hannah would also like to know, why did you start this job, and why do you like sawfish so much? I guess it's probably kind of all linked in together, how this came about.
So I'm actually from Austria originally, and so I grew up in a landlocked country, but I've always had a fascination with the ocean. And then I studied a year of architecture, so I was doing something totally different. And then at some point I realized, hold on a second, I just love nature, so I just want to work with that. And then as you said, I went to Bimini, started working with lemon sharks over there. And then at some point, I also wanted to move to Australia. And then this fascination, I started my master's with shovel nose rays. And from that, it wasn't very far to go to sawfish. And I realized that these animals, there's, the question that everybody asks is, why do they have a saw? What do they use it for? And nobody had ever looked into that. So I was like, oh my God, there's this whole field for a species that is just so incredible, and nobody has worked on that. So that kind of drew me in, and then I got stuck with them because they're just fascinating.
Very cool. Yeah, and I think, working with big charismatic animals, and I did a little bit of work with shovelnose when I was in
Mm.
Australia. Another very cool animal.
Yeah.
But yeah, Australia is a wild place and has some really incredible, uh, animal life, and yeah. So it's easy to see how something, especially questions that haven't been answered in such a fascinating animal, how you could get literally stuck
Yes.
working with that. That's great. What would you say is the most challenging part of studying sawfish?
I think for me, it's the access to the area where these animals are found, because they're now literally restricted to extreme remote areas where there's not much infrastructure out there and things like that. And then also a lot of people would like to, they would love to help working with sawfish, but they want to do it where they are. And I'm always like, well, I can't bring the animals to you. You have to come to these animals. And our field trips are, massive adventures, because it's all the work is so remote. And so, you can't just run to the nearest shop when something breaks. You just always have to be self-sufficient and have everything with you that you need, and be prepared for anything to go wrong. So yeah, I think that's what I find the most difficult.
Yeah, I think again, people who've heard me lead these webinars is talking about being prepared, and how marine science in general, but studying sharks and rays, or really any marine life, is a lot of times you're in very remote places, and it
Yeah.
isn't simple to get what you need. So you have spares, you have an understanding, or maybe you've learned a skill of how to fix something that you never thought you would.
Yeah.
I learned how to mix cement because we needed to fill these cones for our drum lines for fishing in
Yeah.
a location. So life skill that's great to have now. Never thought I would have a need for it, but know how to mix some cement and make that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, and particularly for you guys, you can just see in those images how remote, other wildlife that you're dealing with, challenges, and yeah, something breaks, you're not running down to the convenience store, the Walmart, I guess, uh,
Yeah.
Kohl's, and grabbing the things that you need. You've got to, and that's really important when people are looking at students watching. If you're interested in marine sciences, yes, the degrees, yes, the knowledge, that stuff, but also just having an understanding of equipment and working in the field, and
Yeah.
volunteering internships, like the amazing opportunity you have for people to join you, to see the
Yeah.
reality of field work. It's amazing. It's incredible. You will learn so much, but I think people don't always realize what's actually involved. And
It's challenging as well. And, I often say that for me, the most important skill that somebody can have, for me to take them out in the field, is that they can just MacGyver their way through, when stuff breaks, and just because we can't just throw a hand up in the air and go, oh, well, we can't fix it, we're just not going to use it, because we have like everything that we bring, because we're driving sometimes for 2.5 days with the car on these corrugated roads to get to a field site. So every single item that we have in the car and in the boat is something that we need. So yeah, when stuff breaks, we just got to make it happen.
exactly. Good life skills to have.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
I find that research often is like that. And you don't always have that funding that you're dreaming of, where you can make everything happen. You very often have to make things happen in a very small way. And like when I started Sharks and Rays Australia, I started it by myself, because I found that need, and I saw that these animals were slowly disappearing, and that people, most of the time when I said to people, hey, I work with sawfish, they would be like, you work with what? I've never heard about that. And I'm like, this is the last global stronghold for 4 out of 5 species. Everybody needs to know what a sawfish is.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yep, now, SARA is getting bigger. We've got a lot of people involved, and the word is getting out. But yeah, sometimes you just got to start somewhere, and yeah.
Yeah, and if it doesn't exist, you create it, because you find
Yes.
you have a passion for it, and you want people to know about these animals. And I think
Yeah.
that's really incredible that programs like that exist, that you said, right, this is an animal people need to know about. There isn't exactly a program that's doing what we think should be done, so I'm going to make it happen. And I think that's
Yeah.
awesome for people who are interested in these fields. It isn't always the most obvious route or path. You can
Yeah.
create your own projects, your own companies, and you know, if you're passionate about something, find a way. So I think that's really incredible, especially for young women out there watching as well. That's something I always talk about, is just these opportunities might not seem as obvious, but if you're passionate and you're interested, this is open to you. This is available, and you just have to, you know, be determined. Don't listen when people say maybe it isn't for you, or isn't that, you know, don't listen to that stuff.
I think both of us have probably heard that so many times.
I know, right? And we've all heard it like so many times, and it's a common theme that when I talk to other women in the field, like we've all heard it. We've all been told, but it didn't stop us, and it doesn't have to stop other people either. So I think that's, you know, really what you've done is not just about the animals, but also just highlighting the importance of sticking with something, even if, you know, people are telling you it's not what you should be doing. Hannah also wants to know, what is the biggest sawfish that you have ever seen?
The biggest sawfish that I have seen was 4.5 meters. But recently, so when was that? Beginning of 2019, we also caught a 4.8 meter animal. Wow. So close to 5. Yep.
I'm just gonna, so for those guys, that's about over 14 feet. So very, very big animal. I think the one we saw was, I think she was about 12, I want to say. I'd have to think, 12 or 13. So yeah, big, beautiful animal. Again, with the saw, I was just so surprised at how large the saw was. And when they moved to, like, okay, I've been in the water with a lot of sharks, but I've never been in the water with an animal with a saw on its face. This is amazing.
And it's such a weird adaptation. Like, it's so unique, and it's so it's like every time I see a sawfish, I'm like, what is that?
It's but it just shows you that, I mean, these animals, the adaptations that sharks and rays in general have are, I don't think that people realize how diverse they are. And just, it's, they're so different. I mean, they're all sharks, they're all rays, like we can call them that, but just the diversity amongst their adaptation, shape, size, habitats, everything, is really interesting. So we'll finish off. Hang on, we got one more. Hang on. What method is the safest way to capture a sawfish for your research? From Barb.
So when we do our research, we use gill nets. And so gill nets are nets with a pretty big mesh size. So the mesh size is about that, so 6 inches, 6 inches, 10 inches, can be bigger than that. And so we set these nets in the rivers, so they're set perpendicular to the coastline. So if that's your coastline, we set them like this. And so anything that swims up and down the river will get caught in there. The problem with gill nets is that they're not selective. So anything that swims in that area at that time will get caught in it. And so we have to be very vigilant. We have to check these nets very often to make sure that everything that gets caught in the net gets released in a good condition. And for example, sharks will, you know, some sharks don't last longer than 5 minutes in a gill net because it stops them. So it catches them by the gills, stops them, and they need to actively swim to ventilate their gills. And so they can't do that anymore. And so, so it's not a perfect method, I think, because, as I said, it is very unselective. And for example, we've had issues with crocodiles being caught in gill nets, and that's where it becomes dangerous for us as well. But it is the best method because these animals are so rare that even with gill nets, we have to spend hours and days and weeks out in the field sometimes to catch one animal. It's just how it is.
And if you could, just to kind of finish up, if there was one thing you wish everyone knew about sawfish, what would you say? What do you want people to know about these animals?
I think it's that one thing, to release them alive and to not cut the saw off. I think that's it. Because I think we all have this love for trophies, right? I mean, the reason why trophies exist is because we look at these things and we go, you're so weird and I want to look at that, so I want to have it at home. But it's really, really important to understand that this is one of the main reasons why these animals are going extinct, and that we need to stop taking trophies.
Yeah, absolutely. And for everyone watching, thank you so much for joining us. If you checked out the links on our Sharks for Kids webinars page, there are all the social links for Barbara's organization, Sharks and Rays Australia. You can keep up with their research, see videos, information, find out how to get involved as well on their website. So if you're interested in going and trying some field work, definitely check that out. Amazing experience. I know I'm hoping to get out there, and we're excited that we did a collaboration already, but I didn't get to go. So I'm hoping coming to
Yes.
work with you is on my
Yes.
list as well. And so
Yeah.
that'll be amazing. But thank you to everyone that joined. And thank you so much, Barbara, for all of your time and sharing this information with us and just really celebrating these animals. If you guys missed part of this or want to watch it again or get more information, it will be on our Sharks for Kids YouTube channel as well. So make sure you check that out, check out the links, continue learning, and share some information about these animals. So thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you so much for having me and for giving me this
Absolutely. Take care.
opportunity. Thank you.